Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this expert panel discussion here at the Foreign Correspondents Club of Japan, the FCCJ. I'm Anthony Rowley, a former president of the club, and I will be acting as moderator of today's discussion. This is actually the second of a series on climate change. A topic, I think, on which the world leaders are becoming very focused now, not least in the United States, where, of course, there's just been a tremendous storm in Texas, causing a whiteout and then a blackout. And this follows, obviously, increased numbers of hurricanes, floods, and fires, and so on. Our first event 2 weeks ago, we looked at climate change from a global perspective. And today we're going to focus specifically on Japan, and the title of today's presentation is Climate Change, Is Japan Crisis Prepared? Again, we've got an expert panelist to address this issue, and today they're all here in Japan, so we don't have to juggle different time zones as we did last week between Washington, Manila, and Beijing. So let me introduce our three panelists right away in the order in which they'll be speaking. So the first will be Dr. Naoko Ishii, who is Professor, Executive Vice President, and Managing Director of the Center for Global Commons at the University of Tokyo. And she's a former Deputy Vice Minister of Finance for Japan. Dr. Ishii will focus on what I suppose we can call the broader aspects of climate change as they affect Japan. We also have David J. Semaya, who is Executive Chairman and Representative Director of Sumitomo Mitsui Asset Management, Mitsui Trust Asset Management, and he's a former Executive Chairman of Nikko Asset Management in London and also in Tokyo. David's going to be looking at climate change and the challenges and opportunities it offers for portfolio investors. And then last, certainly not least, we have on my right, Jesper Koll, who is Senior Advisor to investment group WisdomTree and was formerly Chief Strategist and Head of Research for two very prominent US investment banks, JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch. And he will focus on the wider implications and opportunities of climate change for Japanese business, using his expertise not only as an analyst, but also as he's one of the few non-Japanese members of the Keizai Doyukai, the Japan Association of Corporate Executives. So with that, we'll turn now to Dr. Ishii, and I'd like to ask you, Dr. Ishii, is Japan leading or lagging in the battle to deal with the adverse impact of climate change? So over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Let me just put a screen. So can you see my few slides, Anthony?
I can hear you. It's a little bit distorted. If you could.
Good.
Yes, I can see you. Yes, I can see you.
That's good. Yeah. Before we enter this big topic, I just want to start with a few scientific facts, and to basically to convince ourselves why the climate change is so important to achieve the net zero carbon by 2050 is so critical. It's really the science who informed us that why this is critical to our own fate and to our prosperity. And this is actually that comes from the planetary Earth system scientist message to us. That it is very famous chart to some of the sustainability community, but actually that during the 2000, that there are several Earth system scientists who came up with this concept of planetary boundaries. They are very much worried that how long we can continue our current economic model, because as Anthony already told us that we have seen quite an extreme weathers, that other planetary challenges like ocean pollution, that flood and drought and biodiversity loss. So that their idea, their question is that are we okay with our relationship with the planetary Earth system, which is the foundation of our prosperity. So they came up this idea that how to measure that where and to identify that if we are in the safe operating zone or we were entering into the very risky, uncertain that zone from the planetary Earth system point of view. Then they found out that except for few areas, we were already transgressed some of the important planetary Earth system, which does include the climate change, but also other areas of the planetary system, such as biodiversity, that the chemical cycle and land use. So that during the 2015, there are.
No, Carson, I'm sorry, I apologize for interrupting you, but there's a slight echo, which making it difficult to hear. Echo, Chatter. Can you perhaps move a little away from your microphone, if possible?
Yeah. Is that better or worse?
Yes, it seems to be a little better. Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. All right. No, thank you. So that in 2015, in addition to the Paris Climate Accord, there is an important agreement on the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. And there are 17 goals, but then I think it's important for us to structure them as a 3-layer wedding cake. And if you can see this, the right hand of the chart, that the bottom layer consists of the few important planetary Earth system, like climate change, biodiversity, water, and ocean. And this is the foundation of our prosperity. And all other SDGs, like society and economy, are built upon this foundation layer, which I actually call the global commons. So the goal is that for us to stay within these planetary boundaries, that what kind of transformation is needed. And the scientists also told us that in order for us to stay within 2 degree, or hopefully 1.5 degree beyond that pre-industrial level, we need to get the net zero, and we need a very significant transformation of a key economic system. Not only just the energy system, but we need several other systems, such as that the decarbonization of the economy, but then how to do this food and land use system, how to change that our way of production and consumption, then how we can build the cities much smarter. So this is my last slide, I promise you. So that what is required is a total system change for us to stay within the planetary boundaries and for us to achieve this sustainability, sustainable society and economy by 2050. And this chart is actually that measure to measure that the industrial composition, how fast, how rapidly that the economy has been adopting low carbon solutions. In 2015, when the Paris Agreement is reached, there aren't many sectors which provide low carbon solutions. So that is the first left-hand column. But in 5 years later, actually now, that you can see quite a number of the market already provided, commercialized that low carbon solution. It's now the almost 20%, 25% of the market is providing, or is under the low carbon solution, and then they can actually estimate by 2030, 70% of the market structure is under the low carbon solution, the market. So this picture basically tells us that once that in the longer term, the goal is provided, industry is adopting, actually moving very rapidly and to provide the low carbon solution. So that's a good news. But one thing that worried me is that East Japan is actually that catching up and moving fast enough so that they can survive, they can achieve not only 2050 net zero, but also they actually maintain the international competitiveness in this rapidly changing the world. So this is actually the first section of my talk. Then I just want to move two more things. The one is that the Anthony's question about why is if the Japan is ready to tackle this 2050 net zero agenda, and apparently when the Prime Minister Suga announced its declaration of 2050 net zero, it's a little bit of out of blue the party, because we Japanese and economy and the society is not quite ready to tackle that. There isn't really much and a deep and a comprehensive discussion based on science why we need to do it and how to do it. So that why I'm so relieved that we joined the 2050 net zero club. Otherwise, we would become the orphan in this rapidly changing the world. But there is a huge task to be tackled for us Japanese, for us Japan to achieve that that goal. And a few things I think that needs to be done to achieve that goal. Maybe the most important thing in my view is that we need to very quickly establish a kind of a central control tower to provide a longer term pathway analysis to provide how to get the net zero by 2050. And as I mentioned in my opening, that it's not just how to decarbonize energy system. It's not just a mix of energy source. It really needs to show us how other key important systems that the energy system, of course, industrial system, of course, but then the food system, that how to build the cities and how to promote the circular economy to really achieve that transformation. So that is very important. And actually that the world tell us that once we get this transition, our world in 2050 is much better. It's not just this transition, it's not just needed, it's actually quite possible, and it's actually quite desirable, so that how we can show that scenario, that transition pathway to the public and to the business. So that is a very important point. But the second thing this control tower should do is to provide that policy package, that how to get there in a much more precise way, not just 30 years of long-term pathway analysis, but almost in every 5 years, 10 years, what kind of policy package to guide us. And of course, this control tower needs to monitor, assess, and then monitor that implementation. So this is the role of this control tower, and there are quite a number of models already operated globally. One model which I kind of find very interesting is this the UK's the CCC Climate Change Committee, which is actually created when they established the climate change law in 2006. That this CCC Climate Change Committee was established in 2008, and since then they provide this actually the stuff which I just mentioned, the longer term, the scenario pathway, and also a policy package of how to get there in every 5 years. And they are independent, and then they consist of the experts and the very credible experts. And they are actually that the government needs to respond to their advice and how to get there, that if they are doing or not doing, and why. So so that is the first thing I think Japan needs to do. The second thing I think that Japan needs to do is to really achieve to the 2050 net zero. We have to really think about kind of a new type of industrial policy. I'm not a big fan of industrial policy. And in 20 when we did in the 1970s and 60s or 70s. However, we need a kind of a joint the forces joining together from government to the business and actually citizens together, because what we need is a total system transformation. So that there are a few important issues this industrial policy should do is we need to really agree on the fact is that the role of nuclear and the fact how that the energy mix may look like, and we need a consensus among the general public. But another two important thing is that how to push much faster that the existing technology, which is proven to be effective, but then Japan is lagging behind some of the important low carbon technology that then I just showed this in the picture that then when the world is moving towards that direction, we were lagging behind of that. So this is very important one. Then beyond 2030 or beyond pushing those already proven low carbon technology, we need to find a way to how to push other important technology and the innovation, the technology which we need beyond 2030 to get the 2050, because that we have only to achieve the 2050, we need a major transformation that just to push the fact we already know can get us.
Naoko, if I could ask you to keep to three minutes,
sure.
Please. 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
No, actually, I will be finishing in 2 minutes or less than 2 minutes.
Fine.
Yeah. So that then, so where are we? Yeah, that to get the 2030, we can just push what we already know, but to get the 2050, we need a major trajectory change, and that's where this new type of industrial policy is absolutely required. Today we hear from David and Jesper, I think the role of the financial sector, and which is also very much related to this total system transformation. It should be a part of the big picture, the comprehensive strategic picture, but it's also important to bring a consumer and investors into this picture. So that is why we need to really listen to the David and Jesper today. When we move forward, I think that the current discussion is very much kind of initiated by Western world, if I may say so. And we need to really think about that, how to bring other part of the world and the Asia and Africa, but particularly from Japanese business point of view, how we can bring that our Asian partners into this picture is extremely important. It's important not only for us Japanese, but for them and for the world, so that then how to involve those our trading partner, investment partner into this picture is extremely critical. So only 10 years left. We need a major shift, the system transformation, which is very different from what we are pushing now. And then if we are able to do it, we should see that in a very desirable future. Thank you, Anthony. Back to you.
Thank you very much. Interesting point about the possible need for a control tower. I think this has been raised quite often nowadays, but we can return to that later. Okay, well, the cost of fighting, if that's the right word, climate change is going to be very high. Trillions of dollars of investment, writing off investments and so on. The private sector, private savers, private investors are obviously going to have to play a very large part in this. So I'd like to turn to you, David, now, if I may, and say, the fund management industry is obviously going to have to play a very big part in this, in channeling funds into change alleviation. So can you tell us a bit about how prepared the fund management industry in Japan is to tackle this challenge, David?
Sure. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to thank you, Anthony, and FCCJ for the opportunity to chat on the topic and participate in the panel. A little background, Sumitomo Mitsui Trust in the asset management space as a group, we run over $1 trillion in assets, probably one of the largest in Asia, and as a group, the largest in Japan. The company, Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Asset Management, that I'm responsible for, is about 750 billion of that trillion in AUM. We have been a founding member of the UN PRI back in 2006. We signed up to the SDGs. And I just wanted to address a couple of things around asset management, finance in general, and how important we are in this very complicated equation. And Dr. Ishii, I think, really framed it really, really well. The control tower concept about getting policy right. I would add, we need to get nomenclature. We need to be speaking the same words. We're talking about climate change in this conference when we use the word sustainability now. And so it's very confusing. And as an investor, getting the nomenclature and getting the wording exactly right, I think, is very, very important. And also, Anthony, you mentioned, about the write-downs and sort of all the negative. I don't want to accuse you of being negative, but the perception can be very negative of dealing with climate change or dealing with sustainability. And actually, when you look at a normal industrial company, the investment sort of time horizon, given digital transformation and so forth, is becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. So I don't actually think the transfer from non-clean or dirty or not sustainable to sustainable is actually a negative. I think it's actually a very big positive and opportunity. So I just wanted to put that out there. But before I go there, I wanted to talk about asset management companies and the asset management industry in general. What is our responsibility? Well, first of all, we're a fiduciary. We don't normally, traditional long-only mutual fund managers and asset managers and investment managers managing pension funds, we normally don't invest our own capital. And the role of a fiduciary is an interesting one. The interpretation has been defined in the stewardship code and so forth. But if you think about globally, in the United States, for example, until very recently, the role of the fiduciary vis-a-vis its client was to solely make a profit on the investment. And if you move to Europe and you have a look at what the fiduciary role would be, that's quite different philosophically. And then you come to Japan, and I would say that that's different again. So we have different interpretations of capitalism that feed into our role as a fiduciary. Let me then get to the other role that it's very, very important in the financial markets of asset managers, and that's the role of capital allocators. We need to be very efficient capital allocators. And my observation and our observation of what's been going on both globally and here in Japan, and especially in the United States now with the change of administrations, is that solely for profit is really being debated, and a lot of final owners of assets like pension funds are moving away from that exclusive definition into something that is much more sustainable and much more, I would say, sustainable capitalism. Again, we don't have the exact terminology around that. And what I will say is that we always need to be guided by our clients. And of course, in Japan, some of the largest pools of assets, like the GPIF, have adopted an approach to ESG. That approach is one that engages rather than excludes companies. And we are absolutely there in terms of getting ourselves to focus on sustainability and make changes. The question that I think for the panel that you're asking is Japan prepared for this crisis? And I would say we're getting there. I would say that back in 2013, when I was living in London and I first returned to Japan, I would say that probably we weren't. There wasn't even the will. But I believe there is the will now amongst, and a consensus that's been developed amongst industry, financial executives in the finance industry. And we know that winning hearts and minds is the most important aspect of moving any initiative forward. So I'm now quite optimistic about this. When we think about the role of asset managers in the efficient allocation of capital, and balancing that with our role as a fiduciary, there are decisions that now we are making and we have to make as a fiduciary. Do we invest and overweight, for example, I don't want to point at any specific industry, but a real estate development company who is putting tower blocks, right next to the Atlantic Ocean in Florida? How do we think about insurance companies who are insuring those tower blocks? These are real issues that are hitting us as we speak. This is not something that is hypothetical in 5 years from now or 10 years from now. This is happening as we speak. And so I hope that gives you a bit of a backdrop and a framework of where we are and where we've been, where we are, and a sense of where we have to go.
Okay, I think it's fair to say that the darlings of the stock market, if you like, are not necessarily companies that are focused on sustainable investment. We have tech stocks dominating the capitalization of the major indices, but you said you have to be guided by clients, which of course is true, but are there sufficient investment vehicles out there to cater for what is now a huge interest among investors in sustainable investment? I mean, we all know of the term ESG, of course, and that's terribly important, but is there a need for SDG bonds, for instance? The Itochu has just introduced a number of SDG bonds. In other words, is there a need for vehicles, investment vehicles, which the investor can clearly recognize as being focused on a particular aspect of climate change or other social vehicles? Or is there need for imaginative new thinking, financial engineering, if you like, in this area?
So I'm a little hesitant to comment on financial engineering. That's a very loaded and packed term. But what I'll say is this, that yes, of course we need advanced financing into green bonds, into, and by the way, the nomenclature here is very important. Are they green? Are they light green? Are they dark green? We need to address how we label these investments. But I would also push back a little, if you don't mind, Anthony, on the investment that's going into technology, because as Dr. Ishii mentioned, for us to get to where we need to get to, this is not a one-time investment. Put your money to work and then forget about it. Innovation to get to the 2050 goal is absolutely the most important concept that we need to execute on, in my personal opinion, to get there. We don't even know the technology that will help us get to a greener planet. And so actually investing in digitally transformative companies like IT will help us get to a greener place in 2050, or between 2030 and 2050. And yes, the opportunities are in issuing either light, dark, or medium green bonds. But what's also important is, how do we think about, for example, and I think Dr. Ishii had it, smart cities, the food, the biosphere, the water, decarbonization. For example, specifically, the clean grid infrastructure. Without investment in advanced technology, we will not be able to get there. And so whether it be EVs, and I know there's quite a bit of controversy around EV and batteries versus hydrogen and so forth. If we don't invest in both of these, I don't believe there's a winner take all. I think we need to invest in all of these. And by the way, that means taking risks, just exactly what fund managers or portfolio managers do. But it's a positive opportunity. And that positive opportunity will lead us to the solutions that will get us there. For example, 3D printing, productivity increasing tools in technology, robotics, AI, quantum computing, nanotechnology, new clean and renewable plastics, for example. Our menus will be changing. everything will be changed. It'll be very transformative. And whether this be in fund managers that invest in listed companies, fund managers that invest in venture startups, fund managers that invest in private equity and debt, I think there at some point will be a filter that one will be able to use to say, will this get us to our goal in 2050? It may not be obvious, it may not be labeled as sustainable, but actually innovation is so critical and crucial to us getting there.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting. Your point about risk takes me to Jesper Koll. Bill Gates has just written a book on climate change, and he's calling it his Green Manifesto. But he said, and I quote, "Avoiding a climate change disaster requires a very different way of doing business and the courage to take on risks that many CEOs are not used to taking and that investors are not used to rewarding. People around the world from all walks of life want to do something meaningful about climate change. And now we are finally seeing what meaningful action looks like for business leaders. It's having the courage to take risks." So Jesper, turning to the wider impact of on business, does Japanese business have the courage? Is it in fact taking the risks needed to fight climate change?
Look, I think, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. And thank you for David and Dr. Ishii, for really sort of framing part of the issues very, very well. Is Japan prepared to take risks? The answer is, of course. And, people always forget how much risk Japan takes. Do you remember in the mid-80s, the Prius? Everybody thought Toyota was mad in doing a hybrid car. No, it can't be done. This, that, or the other. And whoops, there they were, right? Basically beating the California emissions requirements by 4 or 5 years. It's an ugly car. Sorry, as a German, I'm allowed to say that. But it completely and utterly revolutionized, right, the way we think about transportation. And yes, fine. So Japan and Toyota is not Tesla. It doesn't have the magic of Elon Musk, right? But at the end of the day, right, corporate Japan taking risks, taking very big risks, right, is something that it's very good at. And I think that over the last couple of years, there has been a groundswell of change vis-a-vis that, yes, climate change is an issue. You don't have to Google for a long time to figure out that Japan, with rising sea levels, with greater velocity of typhoons, is at the forefront, right, of being hit hard, being hit hard by climate change there. And corporate Japan knows this very, very well. And I think that, we are seeing great movements, with now the global pressure, with the Biden administration explicitly putting pressure, on Japan, right? And the zero emissions target by Prime Minister Suga is something that is now good politics, right? It is something, I haven't analyzed the latest opinion polls there, but basically the average Japanese, yes, this is a good thing, we subscribe to it. And setting the targets, right, is fantastic because you actually have competition now. The Keidanren, the big, conservative, by membership only, or by invitation only, a business club in Japan is like, oh, it's all going to be very difficult. We can't do 30%, renewables by 2030. But then you've got the Keizai Yukai, the other big business organization, right, which says, hey, we can't do 30% because we can do 40%. So that's a spirit of competition that actually has come through here. And I think, for corporate Japan, you're actually seeing very concrete action. And let me just highlight one thing, and I don't mean to, just focus on one company, but you're seeing it. Itochu Corporation, right? Trading company, huge energy interests around the world. You have a new president. The president, Keita Ishii Keita-san, right, who was the head of the energy divisions, and he stands for total divestment, right, of all the fossil fuel investments. I mean, show me an American company, show me a German company, that is prepared to take that sort of risk and said sayonara to all the fossil fuels. That's what Itochu, one of the monsters in the Japanese trading community, is actually doing. You've got other companies, Mitsubishi trading company, obviously, following suit to some extent. And I think, the classic Japanese looking over your shoulder, right, and moving along together is actually happening here now. And I wouldn't be surprised if indeed Japan is going to meet these, targets, earlier. The other thing that people always forget, and I think David and Dr. Ishii sort of alluded to it, is like we still think of companies as these sort of steel companies, when manufacturing accounts for less than 15%, right, of what goes on in the Japanese economy, and it's all this other cool stuff, right, that's going on. But that doesn't mean that we don't need to worry about. Anthony, you said, oh, but there's no investments. I can't invest in Nippon Steel, right? I need to invest in something cool, right? Like Bitcoin, right? I know Anthony is a big punter in the Bitcoin market. No, I'm sorry, I'm joking. But I mean, you'll probably be aware that the mining of Bitcoin consumes as much energy as all of New Zealand does, right? And that's going to go higher. So it's not as though these soft DX solutions, right, do have no need for, energy efficiency, for sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. Excellent risk taking. You've got your own landlord here, Mitsubishi Estate, right? Basically making a commitment to be completely, carbon neutral, right? Actually by, I don't want to misquote it, by the end of this year or by 2023? I'm not sure. Something like that, but it's not 2030, it's way before that, right? You've got Tokyo Corporation, another real estate developer, right? Again, one going for carbon neutrality. Yahoo Japan, right, going for complete carbon neutrality, et cetera, et cetera. So it's the soft companies that are actually coming together, right? Now, I love the fact that Dr. Ishii, I love the fact that, everybody talks about this great control tower, right? As a German, I'm supposed to really like this, but I was educated in the United States, so I really don't like this. I think that, setting targets like the zero emissions targets, right? And then, yes, there's obviously a coordinating role, right, that the central and very importantly, the local governments need to play. But at the end of the day, it's exactly these high targets, these stretch targets, and then individual companies, right, doing exactly what David Semaya pointed out, taking risks. Because today in 2021, we do not know what exactly the solutions are going to be. It's perfectly possible, in my own opinion, that nuclear fusion, right, may actually be the big surprise, right, that solves our problem, right? Now, I'm not an engineer, so I can say this. It's kind of like saying quantum computing is going to solve all our problems, but it's important that indeed this risk-taking is, being encouraged and is being encouraged aggressively. And they're actually, the numbers are quite interesting because, if you and I do set up a venture capital fund, right, and do, look for investment opportunities, you actually do find that there's a lot of creative minds trying a lot of creative things. And most importantly, to David's point, if I am the fiduciary, I am the asset manager paid to take risk, my clients, so the big asset owners, the pension funds, the insurance companies, even the banks and the trading companies, et cetera, right? They are actually very, very focused, right, on allocating money to that, right? So that's quite interesting, that you've got, the combination of money being available, a consciousness of what needs to be done, and in my personal opinion, the governments in the world finally doing the right steps by actually setting stretch targets. Even though, of course, personally, I think that, God, by 2050, how old are we going to be, right? So I think, if John F. Kennedy was able to get us to the moon and back within a decade, personally, and this is my personal, I fail to comprehend while mankind today in 2021 can't get to zero emissions by 2031, right? But, then again, that's why I'm not a good politician, being forward here. Japan itself, just a couple of facts here, and this dovetails into what David says. You may be aware that there is, an organization called Science-Based Targets, where you've got, there is about 140 of the big financial institutions. I think David's institution is part of that. They manage about slightly more than $20 trillion of assets. And they are, putting pressure, very specific pressure, on about 1,800 companies around the world. Those 1,800 companies actually make up about 40% of the global market cap indices, right? And what is interesting, right? And the goal, of course, is to get, towards significant science-based target reductions, going on. What is interesting is there, of these 1,800 companies that pressure is being put upon, about 1,200 have actually responded in a positive way that, yes, the CEO, the board is committed to achieve those stretch targets, right? And of these 1,200 companies, about 630 are from Europe. 114 are from Japan. 209 are from the United States, and 34 are from China, right? So 114 out of 1,200, that's not bad going, right? So I think, to your specific question, is Japan prepared to take risk? The answer is absolutely yes. And also to the broader point, is corporate Japan embracing, and really not just embracing and paying lip service, right, to energy, sustainability, to zero carbons, etc., but are they actually making decisions to move in that direction? I think the answer is absolutely yes, right? I think it's kind of like womenomics, right? That finally stuff is actually happening. It's being embraced at the board level, and decisions are actually being made. Let me end here.
Okay, well, that's very encouraging to hear. Before we turn to questions, I'd like to just raise this point about control towers. Dr. Ishii, I assume when you talked of a control tower, you meant a control tower here in Japan. If so, if there were such a control tower, if someone is to establish it, who should establish it? Control towers, I raised this question 2 weeks ago, and we had an international panel of who's in charge. I mean, we have very many different initiatives to fight climate change, not least being the Paris Accord, of course. But many governments are doing their own thing, and it sometimes seems, and this goes to your point, Jesper, that perhaps the targets are not ambitious enough, that we don't have enough targets set at a central level, which industry, for instance, and the investment community can move towards. Just as much of interest, the G20 group with the IMF is at the moment working on this whole question of who's going to coordinate the whole exercise. So I'd like to just ask you, Dr. Ishii, first, then what did you have in mind by a control tower? And very quickly, David and Jesper too, I mean, do we need more coordination in order that targets can become more ambitious? So Naoko-san.
Sure. Yeah. Actually, I see several different types of so-called control tower. I really don't see that which one is really best fit to Japan. But what I really meant by that is that I see two important things needs to take place. One, that everybody at this panel agree the importance of setting that target or the credible goals, but this target needs to be credible to investors and the business and the consumers. It has to be based on the science. It has to be based on the credible pathways, because it's not just a mix of the energy sources. It really needs a transformation of many, many different systems and the sectors. And that's what I see actually the missing. And then the second important thing for this so-called control tower to do is a coordination role. I do very much agree on both David and Jesper about the business and the investors and CEOs can take the risk. However, it's just pushing the already known solution is one thing, but when we need to really come up with a much bigger risk to be taken, and nobody really knows that which technology can be kind of surviving in 20, 30 years of time. And then I see that this coalition among the business and the policy and the scientists may be very useful, so that for coordination role, where the uncertainty is that much, I thought that this so-called controlling tower can play some role of the coordination and also sharing the risks. So that's two things I see this controlling tower can do. Back to you.
David, very briefly, do you have any comment on that? Need for perhaps more specific targets set jointly between governments and the private sector?
Well, I think this is, again, a personal comment, will reflect my background similar to Jesper's, not originally coming from Japan. The need for innovation and the need to be able to try new technologies and fail, and try them and fail quickly and then move on, is something that Japan needs to get its head around, because if it does not, it will be very, very difficult to achieve what we want to achieve. So it's not, I understand the consensus, coalition, let's work together, and I think that's absolutely necessary. But we also need to somehow drive, whether that innovation comes from within companies or from outside, that drive to innovation will help us solve the challenges. The point that I'd make about control tower in finance, it is absolutely critical. I call it, rather than a control tower, a clearinghouse, where we need the ability. Finance is basically global, the financial industry, as well as the asset management industry. There are local rules and regulations, but when I'm taking capital from a client, retail, an individual, a major institution, and I'm asked to invest based on risk and return parameters, I take that capital and I invest it globally in every market around the world. And that is diverse, a diversified, the definition of a diversified portfolio. We all are aware of GAAP, the global accounting standards that we have around the world. Japan has its own version of GAAP. China has its own version of GAAP. There are certain quirks, but as an investor, I'm aware when I look at a balance sheet in Europe, in the United States, those countries that have signed up to GAAP, I understand just by looking at the balance sheet, where are the risks? And here are the areas based on Japanese GAAP that I've got to compare to my global GAAP standard or Chinese GAAP. We need something in the financial industry around that, so I can allocate capital. As I said before, is it a green bond? Is it a dark green bond? Or is it a light green bond? And we are still far away from that. Kudos to the Europeans who have done a lot of work on taxonomy. Someone said to me, it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. We need something simplified so that we can get to the job that we're supposed to be doing of efficiently allocating that capital. It'll make things a lot easier. In terms of then the global control tower, well, as you know, we have the Paris Accords, and again, I'm stepping out of my area of expertise. Perhaps Jesper is more familiar, or Dr. Ishii is more familiar. Who controls some of these resources in the green economy will mean very, very, very large themes and challenges and opportunities from a geopolitical perspective. So solar panels right now, where are the majority manufactured? Who controls this is really, again, an issue. And when you talk about control tower, I don't know how global we can get on this from a geopolitical perspective.
Okay, I'm tempted to say
a lot there. I'm sorry, but yeah.
I'm tempted to say Warren Buffett, who's just bought heavily into the Japanese trading houses, but Jesper.
No, I mean, this is a long. I think. Look, we know what we want, right? Which is that we do want zero. We want to wean the global economic system off the fossil fuel and of the carbon emissions. I mean, that's what we want, right? And I think, sort of having so the targets, they should be global targets, yes. And again, as a German, I'm supposed to say this, right? But I think it's just not realistic because, in rural India, in Bangalore or elsewhere, they would say, well, hell no, what you guys did in the 60s and 70s, why are we not allowed to do this now? So I think that, having the marketplace for targets is actually quite important. And I mean, I've certainly had discussions with the Prime Minister and said, look, there's actually an opportunity here. If Japan wants to set the global standard, just as California did, right, in the 1980s, we said our emissions are going to have to go, and it was X percentage more strict than anything anybody had imagined, right? And industry rose to the challenge because no matter what, in 2050, in 2060, 2080, the world will still consume energy, right? And the stricter the targets are now, the more ambitious the targets are now. I think that the better the possibility of results are. And I'm very worried, quite frankly, that the more talk there is of coordination and building up a Kremlin, that tries to coordinate, the greater actually the risk that we are stifling, the creativity of engineers, the creativity of new systems, because by definition, a coordination tower sooner or later is going to become captive, right, to the incumbents. And that, I think, is something, regulatory capture is something that we absolutely want to avoid as much as possible. And we do need to give the market a chance.
Okay, let's close down all the control towers and let the flights take off and land by themselves. No, I'm being
That's a completely different problem. That's a queuing problem.
No, all right, let's turn to questions then from the floor or from questions online. Do we have any questions from the floor? Sato-san, are there any questions online yet? Not yet. You have a question? Not now. Oh, yes, Joan. Please, sorry, come up to the microphone as usual and identify yourself, and mic over here, please. Thank you. And if it's addressed to a specific panelist, please say so. If not,
okay. I think it's just addressed generally. So my name's Joan Anderson from Soka Gakkai, and I'm very excited by this panel because I used to work in finance and now I work here for a very different kind of being, and it's so nice to see everything coming together a bit. But I have a question about quarterly reporting schedules and the pressure that puts on companies to produce short-term reports, and also the whole sort of GNP thing. And are we ever going to get away from such a narrow and unhelpful way of measuring things? Thank you.
Okay, well, David, do you want to take, David, you take that one first, quarterly reporting and the pressures it puts on companies to perform, I suppose, and maybe not do the best things.
Listen, again, my personal point of view is I have, no objection, to reduce the emphasis on quarterly reporting. We know where that comes from generally. One particular jurisdiction, is continue to focus on it. I think there's a lot of work in Europe and elsewhere to try to move away from that. I just think it will take time. This is the way an industry is structured. I mean, it's sort of like sustainability. When you're structured in one way, to really move away from that takes quite a bit of effort. But I will say that, and this is to Anthony, your point, I think earlier on about tech stocks, for example. Does quarterly reporting matter that much when we're seeing some of the results, that we've seen in the tech area? I'm half joking, but I think it's important to think about moving away from quarterly reporting, and also to think about yes, is GDP and GNP really the right measure for the world? Is that perversely has driven us into some of the problems we have with climate and with global warming?
Okay,
Just for 30 seconds, I'm a huge fan of quarterly reporting because I think it is very important to keep people accountable to their targets. How this is managed by the CEOs. That's a very different issue, but it's like running a marathon. When you run a marathon, right, you've got an overarching goal that is, in my case, 4 hours away, but you do want to take stock, every, whatever it is, 5 miles, right? To see how you're doing relative to the targets that you have set. And if you don't achieve the targets, right? Like, for example, I'm quite sure I don't want to sort of be too critical, but if I said, we set targets for, say, outside directors or female participation on boards, right? If that is reported on a quarterly basis, everybody would clap, right? So it's the whole message, and I think the whole point of having a more holistic approach, right? That yes, it's not about your quarterly earnings only. It is about, the longer term goals that you're trying to achieve with the company. So Itochu, for example, just divesting from a Colombian coal mine, right, is a one-off event that may or may not do something to the share price during that week. But, for the president to outline the overarching strategy, this is where we want to go, this is where we want to get to, that I think is very important. And, having a more holistic assessment where it's not just shareholder value, right, but where it is the sustainability goals, right, I think is very, very important. And again, I want to reiterate my point. I do think it's very important, that you've got ESG, SDGs, you've got this whole, competition, and I actually think it's very good that we don't have one global standard by which to measure by, because quite frankly, there isn't. Right. And so I think the competition between that is going to be very important. And as a German, and this is where Japan has a problem, right? I mean, the reason for why Europe, led obviously by Germany, sorry, there's no French people in the room, but the reason for why this is such a big thing is because it's completely part of the political culture. Because the Green Party, whether you like it or not, is real as a force in German and in European politics. And as a result of that, you have a politically anchored advocate. Now, that is something that here in Japan, we certainly don't, right? We've got Japan being peer pressured by the rest of the world into doing something, right? And that's why Prime Minister Suga, that's why young Minister Koizumi, latches onto these things, right? But it's not an endogenous, it's not a homegrown conviction. This is something that needs to be done. I think we're going to get there with the next generation of leaders, right? But that's where Europe, as David pointed out, definitely is very, very much in the lead. And the control tower in Europe, right, is actually being driven, and the energy of the control tower comes, to a large extent from the political mechanism that you actually have.
Good point. Well, before we leave that, Naoko-san, do you think Japan needs a Green Party in order to drive this movement more strongly, and is likely to get a Green Party?
No, actually, I just would like to see the entire Japanese society to become much more sensitive to the green stuff. As Jesper just mentioned, the current movement, even if he said that we are ready for net zero, I actually don't necessarily think so. It's, as also he mentioned, it's quite exogenous, or it's not really endogenous. That it really came actually from external pressure, and that's why that I see that that the reason I'm actually advocating this and that credible target is that we need a much more science-based kind of credible pathway. And I actually about this controlling tower that Jesper mentioned, it's more like a political the party, the political picture, but I think it is based on science. That's something that we are missing. Somehow the Japanese, the entire population, it's so lagging behind to understand, grasp this message from the science. And if whatever called the science control tower, or whatever called can do, we need to come up with a science-based, the evidence-based, fact-based long-term strategy. And that's how we believe. I believe that even the business and consumer investor can align themselves, align their risks that, to get there. And that's why I actually found it very, very important. And this control tower, whatever called, I don't necessarily want the control, but then that reason why I think that kind of strategy is important is it can put the picture. It's not just needed, it's plausible and it's beautiful. It's predictable. A lot of strategy now show that then the cost, it's also a little bit with the contrast in the fact that Anthony, you said, it's a cost is much smaller than benefit can be better, the bigger. So how you can really present it so that the people can really align themselves and towards that goal.
Good point. Okay, thank you. David, I know you've got a board meeting coming up quite soon. Are you with us for a few more minutes yet? Because there's a question I would like you. Okay, so, but first let me turn to the floor again. Questions from the floor. Kurt, I think you have a question. Please identify yourself as usual. And,
I'll take this away for a moment. My name is Kurt Sieber. I'm an associate member. I'm always very excited when I hear Jesper Koll talk about the not only here, but also in the Japan Times. So 2 weeks ago when we talked here about the international side, we agreed that today we would talk a little bit more about Japan. And I have two things, which well, I have actually many more, but I'll try to restrict it to two. Yes. First, I mean, yes, everything is going wonderful forward and Mr. Suga is doing very well and so on and so on. But in actual practice, when we are today, we have the situation that Japan is still heavily investing in coal.
Sure.
And I mean, not only places which are already under construction, but in the planning stage, we have 15 to 20 big projects in Japan. On top of that, we have Japanese companies investing in coal or financing in the rest of the world, particularly, of course, in Asia. So what are we going to do at the short term to manage that problem? Because ultimately these coal plants will all become standard.
stranded assets.
What is it?
Stranded assets?
Yeah, stranded. Yeah, stranded is the word. They're all going to be stranded at long-term losses, depreciation by the owners. So that's my first question. How are we going to do about that? Okay. Secondly, I'm talking a lot about consumers, and consumers are, of course, an important part in the whole thing. And out of 10 people I ask, what is the price or the fitting price for solar panels or for solar I have one on the roof myself, and 10 years ago we started with 48 yen per kilowatt hour. Right. And this has given the consumers here in Japan the idea, how can we ever pay for this very, very expensive, well, high cost nuclear solar power. Okay. And may I ask the people here, tell me what is the fitting amount today per kilowatt hour? Do you know about that? Huh? Does anybody know? Yes, please. It is 17 or 70. Yeah, well, 17. I tell you because I'm selling my my excess to Toden myself. It's now 8.5 yen per kilowatt hour. Okay. Still Toden is charging us 30 yen per.
Okay. I'll have to interrupt you here to get the panelists.
So let's turn. We have to tell the consumers that actually the cheapest long-term scene, the cheapest price of electricity will be in renewables.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and renewables you just mentioned. The situation is different from country to country.
Yeah.
Oh, that's absolutely true. There is no
Kurt, I'm sorry, I'll have to stop you here
No,
because
no,
we're coming.
I'm ready in 20 seconds. So, for instance, in Chile, we have 100% renewables. 50% is hydro and 50% is solar. So that cannot work in Japan. But Japan finally has to get a proper policy for the.
Okay, Jesper, let's
and
thank you.
I think the both points are incredibly interesting, you know, because there's always the elephant in the room, you know, and there's just no question that the elephant in the room in Japan is nuclear. Right, you know, where you've got, you know, the whole plethora of vested interests, you know, aligned, et cetera, and it's the hidden elephant in the room, right? And that coal has become the bridge, right, into, you know, over a river where there is an uncertain future, right? You know, and I think just a couple of days ago, again, you know, the energy minister is very clear that, you know, rethinking nuclear, right, possibly raising the engineering targets, right, to come up with better engineers, with newly invented, safer products, right? And this is a very interesting tension because obviously Fukushima and the allergy, the stigma, right, you know, from a political side, it goes against that. So I don't have an answer. There is no answer, right? How to wean yourself off the coal there. We're in this transition process. But I think at the end of the day, to your point about solar, right? You know, spreading the word, marketing the cleanness, right? And that's something where in Europe, right, you do have the green parties, you know, doing the good work to actually, you know, just say, hey, you know, it doesn't have to be heavy, it doesn't have to be nuclear, right? There is alternatives and they're actually economical. It used to be 20, 30 years ago that clean was a luxury. Clean is no longer a luxury. It can be part and parcel of your everyday consumption.
Okay, David, any comments on coal? We've heard coal on coal, but now we'd like to hear Semaya on coal.
Well, look, you know, Jesper made some interesting comments about you know, Europe and Germany. The reality, as I understood it, is after Fukushima, Angela Merkel took a very specific and deliberate view on nuclear, and Germany paid the price for a number of years, and now has come out in a much better position vis-a-vis not having nuclear and renewable. Look, I think Americans have this game called Monopoly, and it's always wonderful to get a get out of jail free card. And that get out of jail free card is what I think we all need here in past decisions that were, at the time, they were probably viewed as the right decisions, but hence, just 5 years later, we know that they're not the right decision. So how we leapfrog this challenge, this bridging challenge is really a big question for Japan. The other thing I would say on the consumer side, and this is again a personal view, we've implemented, I don't know what it is, 2 yen, 3 yen, 5 yen for a plastic bag when we go to a supermarket or a store. If we want to really be serious about it, it should be a 50 yen charge. And that will get people to understand that there are consequences. You know, Japan consumes per capita in terms of plastic a very, 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 very high amount. And it's okay. I remember coming here as a student 40 years ago, and in the homestay I had, the homestay mother would use the Ofuro water the next morning that we all took the bath together, use the Ofuro water. There was a tube that went into the washing machine, and be very, very careful about saving water. And there are many other things. Right? We used to get bentos delivered, and they were then, and milk delivered, and the glass bottles were put outside, the bento boxes were put outside, they were then cleaned and washed and reused. Today, we all go to convenience stores and we buy bentos made of plastic. And so I think Japan has been there. When Dr. Ishii talked about an industrial plan, we need a plan to get us to reverse that. We need to reverse what we've done over the past 40 years, because Japan actually, in many respects, culturally, did focus on the environment. So again, this is a personal view. I think Jesper's comment about it is a bottom-up movement, hence Angela Merkel can make these decisions easily. We need more of that in Japan. We need more of that in Japan.
Okay.
I do have to go. I'm sorry, but thank you so much, Anthony.
Do you have time to answer just one more question? No, very quickly.
I've got 4 minutes.
Okay, very quickly. A simple question, maybe a too oversimplistic question, but I think a lot of people now are very concerned about climate change, and they want to invest in it. They do a bit of research. They see that there's something called the Sustainable Development Goals, very nice, very clear cut, 17 goals, climate change and so on, set out in 2015. So they probably think, or some of them think, I would like to invest in one of those SDGs, but they can't do that as such. There are very few clear-cut vehicles to invest in the SDGs. They go to investment managers and they get lots of advice on ESG and so on. But maybe repeating question I asked before, but is there enough guidance for the public that are keen on investing in climate change as to what kind of investment they can get in that has an impact? I don't mean impact investing, but or not. I mean, you as fund manager know this. You must have lots of questions from your staffs and clients about, well, what's the most effective way I can get into doing something about climate change? Comments?
So I will link this to my previous comment and about the bottom-up interest in this topic. We have seen a groundswell of interest by consumers in North America. I'm not familiar with Latin America, but definitely in Europe over the past 3, 5, 7, 10 years. And it really has come out last year, where inflows into green, sustainable indices were truly amazing. The groundswell and then the actual movement of assets, basically capital and money into these opportunities has been great. We have seen some in Japan, but remember, the Japanese mutual fund or investment trust industry is more sold than purchased. Individuals are sold products rather than coming out and demanding products. And this is a whole separate conversation. But I will say we had a very large ESG fund launched last year. I think they raised 5-6 billion equivalent of US dollars. And there are opportunities to invest in ESG-oriented funds. SDGs were something that was developed not specifically with investment in mind. And there are a lot of asset managers who are now thinking about how can we create a very, very broad SGV type of investment vehicle. It's very, very challenging because ESG is again, a lot easier. The criteria is there, there's screening one can do, but SDG is very, very challenging to create an investment product that exactly follow that. But I'm optimistic. I believe that there is pent-up demand, there is interest, and a lot of the investment we're seeing in the United States into these products from individuals is coming from younger people who, when they join a company, they are asked, do you want to sign up for a pension, i.e. a 401k? And they're making the choices because the choices are available when they sign up. And I think we need more of that in Japan. There are, as we say, green shoots. We're seeing that, and I think it's for all of us to encourage that and push that. And I think in the next couple of years you'll see much more of that here.
Thank you. Thank you for your very valuable contribution. I know you have to go, so please feel free to
And
leave.
thank you. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be with everyone on the panel, and see you again. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesper, your comments on this question.
I mean, it's very, look, I mean, there's, you know, I just Googled, ESG ETF, and there's about, you know, 1 billion responses that you can out there. You know, I mean, there's not, you know, there is a, you know, if you want to sell a product, a financial product right now, you've got to have two things, right? One is ESG, the other one is AI. You know, everything else is like, oh, you know, it's like value. You know, so you know, so I mean, again, there is a, you know, there's a global consensus that is out there, right? You know, I think it's very interesting that, you know, even in the People's Republic of China, right, the leadership of the Communist Party, you know, is embracing, you know, environmental and sustainability goals. They're doing it in their own way, which is the way it's supposed to be, right? But again, it's not as though this is a G7 invention, right? It is pretty obvious that something is changing in the planet with climate. And I think as a result of that, we are actually seeing a response there. Again, in my personal opinion, I think that it's just my God, you know, what, boys be ambitious, right? 10 years to the moon and back, right? Why is this not possible?
Very quickly, Naoko-san, in closing, do you feel that the general public, if you like, especially in Japan, needs a way to invest in climate change that's more simple to understand?
Yes, actually, that there is a growing interest, as already mentioned by both Jesper and also David. But then it's really good to see this and the interest coming from the ground, from the youth. However, these interests needs to be guided. I think that in the one clear science-based, fact-based target. This the plastic bag should be 50 yen is really a good example that somebody should tell them it's a good that they are now become much more conscious, but then 2 yen doesn't really make any difference. That is a scientific fact. It needs to really take place in science-based and direction, and I think it's really the role of whatever called control tower that to give the direction that what is really needed and where to match.
All right, thank you very much. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. We don't at the moment have any more climate change events scheduled, but I think, you know, there's been quite a lot of interest in this subject, obviously, and so it's a subject we may well return to in the future. So in the meantime, thank you very much to the panelists for your expert presentations, which I personally have enjoyed very much. And thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.